and welcome to this special episode of the Orle Gniazdo podcast. Today I decided that for talking about such a topic like Petyhorcy, which is the unit present in our nearly all English Lithuanian faction, we should make it in English so the people who play as this unit can actually understand what I'm talking about instead of having to look at subtitles every single time. This episode will be recorded in Polish as well later on. For now, I decided that to get things straight for the first time, we're gonna be talking English. And for today's audition, I guess is the word in English, I have brought a special guest who doesn't know Polish, thusly we are talking in English today, Mr. Elingas, who is Lithuanian.
Hello.
As such, today we will be discussing with Mr. Elingas the intricacies and various topics, basically everything we know about the Petyhorcy. I hope you enjoy this audition, and I hope you will come back for more, because this is the first English episode we're doing. Originally, I planned to do every single episode in both English and Polish, but that kind of takes time, so we did resign from that. But maybe we will do more English episodes in the future. Without further ado, let us get right into it. First of all, first topic of discussion, what is a Petyhorcy? What is the definition? From the various sources and intricacies, well, not intricacies, just from the sources and modern information on the topic, we have a rather clear enough definition of what a Petyhorcy is. Kuba Pokojski, in his book, The Great Book of the Winged Hussars, writes, "It is a poorly researched cavalry formation, mainly appearing in Lithuania in the 16th to 18th centuries, although it was also raised in the crown. It is a unit situated between the Winged Hussars and Pancerni on the totem pole." He also writes later on, "The unit's name allegedly comes from Circassian mercenaries being hired in the second half of the 16th century onto Lithuanian service, recruited from Petyhorcy, that is 5 mountains in the Caucasus, between Kuban and Terek. They've served on horse, usually equipped with a spear, Circassian sabers, chainmail, and a misiurka helmet. Circassian riders, called Pięciogórcy, so Petyhorcy, probably became the basis for the Petyhorcy formation. For protective equipment, that's for later. So as you see, as is the case with the original Hussars who came from Hungary, Petyhorcy also came to Lithuania and Poland from Circassia, probably in the 15th to 16th centuries. So back when Lithuania wasn't yet in the union with Poland. There is another opinion of where the Petyhorcy came from, which is a Polish ethnograph, I cannot quite recall his name right now, writes that the Petyhorcy actually got their name from the village of Petyhorya in Lithuania, or modern Belarus. I can't quite remember where it lies, but that's not really important. In my opinion, it really ties back into that metaphor that it's all from Circassia anyway, because, well, the name of the village is Petyhorya, and that just means 5 mountains in Circassian. What do you think about that, Elingas? Do you think they came from there or there?
I think it makes more sense from Circassia as... What was the village name you said? That was like in Lithuania or Belarus?
It's like literally just Petyhorcy, but in Polish, so Petyhorya.
Yeah, there's like... I don't think there's any like towns or villages in Lithuania. Well, when I say Lithuania, I mean in the territory of modern-day Lithuania, where Lithuanians, the Baltic people. That's a really like Slavic name? To like my understanding.
It's a Slavicized term for Circassians, to my knowledge, because Circassians call themselves something else, but when they came to Lithuania, and then when Polish became the main language of Lithuania for a while, the term became Pięciogórcy, so the people of 5 mountains, or the mountaineers of 5 mountains. So I think it's really the same. I think you would have a term in your own language for that, which is 5 mountains, but actually, do you have any term for that? People who come from 5 mountains? Or Circassia? How do you call them?
I don't know, or I probably forgot. But in Lithuanian, Petyhorcy is Petyhorcy. But
That
I'm
actually
not
sounds
sure.
more like the original circation spelling, so I think you're closer to that than the Poles are.
Oh wait.
Yeah,
I'm
because
still
it's Petyhorcy, you said?
Petyhorcy. I'll type it in the. It's spelled Petihorrai.
That is much closer to the original spelling than the Polish one. So I think you actually have a more preserved term compared to Poland. But I do think it's just the same modern, yeah. But I do think it's just the same. How do you say root anyway? Those are the two. Those are the two possible sources we have. But I see Elingas wants to say something to that, so please go ahead.
I would like to say that Lithuanian is a very like conservative language. Like it doesn't really change. It hasn't really changed much throughout the centuries. Well, it has changed, but like.
Well, you had to decolonize it, so I think it changed a little bit.
Possibly, but like again, it's a conservative language, so maybe it's like nearly almost exactly the same as as it was said like 500 years ago.
In my opinion, your spelling of Petyhorcy sounds more realistic than the Polish one. I think Polish one just went through the trouble of adapting to our lexicon and just kind of lost its original ring. I do wonder how the word actually sounds in actual Circassian languages. I think it would raise, just explain a little. But that's all on the matter. Unless you want to say something onto that, then we're going to move on to equipment.
I have nothing else to add to that. I know nothing.
I know nothing. Okay. Okay. So, next, equipment. Second topic. Kuba Pokojski writes, in the same book, for protective equipment, they usually wore chainmail, less commonly armor. It depended on the enemy that they were fighting. Petyhorcy fought with Rohatyna spears, which were longer than those of Cossack cavalry, or alternatively, kopias shorter than those of winged hussars. It is interesting that in a single banner, some riders could have kopias, while others had Rohatyna. Sometimes foreigners mistook Petyhorcy for hussars. In the time... Actually, that's pay, so that's for later. Onto this last thing. Sometimes foreigners mistook Petyhorcy for hussars. Something really interesting that I read is that when Sobieski, the King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, was riding out from Kraków, one Polish traveler recorded that before his before his carriage drawn by horses, there rode 4 units, 3 hussar ones and 1 Petyhorcy one. But another less informed foreigner wrote that there were 4 hussar units. So as you see, this did in fact happen. As for their equipment, further on, this is very interesting because for the little information we have on the Petyhorcy, most of it is actually concerning equipment, which is very good. Next, Sobieski writes, all banners, Cossack and light alike, must be equipped with spears, depending on need and situation, like Petyhorcy spears or lighter. Petyhorcy kopias require great training to use, because it is a kopia, so a lance, akin to a hussar's. The horse needs to be good and large, and you need a mundstück, because it is hard to control the lance. A mundstück is, I don't know the translations for it, so I just put it as it is in Polish. It's basically like a piece of leather which you insert your kopia into, and instead of putting your kopia under your, how do you say, armpit to couch it, you just put it like, it absorbs the impact of the hit. Next on, Andrzej Fredro writes in 1675, a light hussar or a petty-korzec on a good horse, with a lance 7 elbows long without a pennant, will be formed in a shishak with a cuirass front plate, or in a kaftan well sewn, and in chainmail with vambraces, spurs at the leg, bandolier with 4 PNG, which is a unit of length, with a long gun, pistol at least 1, ammo pouch, and an ammo pouch as large as in an infantryman. So as you see, the equipment was quite diverse, and as listed before, half of the Hussar unit, the Petyhorcy unit, could use lances, while the other, well, not lances, spears, because with a lance you can couch, with a spear you cannot. Half of the unit could use spears, while the other half could use these shorter Petyhorcy kopias. It is also worth mentioning that in 1689 another source types, in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania there is a third type of troops, armed in chainmail but having kopias like Hussars, yet shorter with shorter pennants. So this is another thing which is very interesting. One source states that the kopias did not have any pennants at all, while another states that they had them but they were shorter, which by the way makes a lot of sense, because the pennant is a very heavy thing to put on the end of your lance. So either removing it allows you greater mobility and ease of use, or keeping it shorter doesn't make it like drag across the ground, because the shorter the copia, the sillier it will look. And there could even be cases where if you're riding slow, this long pennant literally gets stuck under your horse's hooves. That may be a little extreme, however, I can really imagine it happening, because if you have a pennant as long as your lance or your copia, that becomes a problem. So I can really picture them both having the pennant but shorter, or not having it at all. So I think both Fredro and the other source are right in this aspect. Another, in 1610 under Smolensk, Petyhorcy units march with us, some in armor, others in chainmail, with great shishak helmets. For clarity, a shishak is a kind of Hussar helmet which came to Poland from Turkey. It is a very cool helmet. It protects you very well from all angles, and I really like them. So yeah, you needed to know that I really like them, but whatever. They are very nice helmets, and up till today, before I was doing all this research, I was very convinced that only Hussars used shishaks and panzerni, not Petyhorcy, but I am proven wrong, and I'm happy because of that, because it allows us to paint a more full picture of this era. Is there anything else I should say about that? Oh, also, Radosław Sikora, a very respected Polish author, writes, when the enemy became better equipped, the Petyhorcy, alongside Hussars, wore armor. In the first half of the 18th century, it was recommended for panzerni to also wear armor, which they massively did. Kitowicz writes that in the Lithuanian army, Petyhorcy banners mean as much as in the Crown army the panzerni do. What this means is that after the first half of the 18th century, basically all units of panzerni and Petyhorcy wore armor. And one thing in Polish historiography and original sources is that for armor, you have two terms. You have pancerz and you have zbroja. One means, pancerz means a chainmail shirt, while the other means actual armor. So Hussar armor, cuirasses, all that. So basically all units wore armor. So mostly cuirasses. We have sources and we have paintings of panzerni in the later half of the 18th century wearing cuirasses, karwashes, so vambraces and helmets, so shishaks. But before that, we mostly have examples, even shortly after Sobieski and under August, of Petyhorcy, probably Petyhorcy, but definitely panzerni wearing chainmail, so pancerze. One thing I think I've read before in this is that the Petyhorcy and panzerni and Hussars, all cavalry units in the Commonwealth, changed the armor they wore based on the situation. So if they were fighting Tatars, they dropped their heavy Hussar armor, of course the Hussar units or their cuirasses, in favor of chainmail, because I don't personally understand this. Maybe it was like a riveted chainmail. Chainmail, they say, protected them well enough against arrows, while allowing flexibility. But au contraire, if they were fighting Swedes, Muscovites, Germans, whatever, they put on their armor back, because it protected them against gunfire. So it's a very interesting picture. I think we got all the equipment listed. So In summary, they used kopias, which were shorter than Hussar ones. One source states that they were shorter by exactly 1 meter. I don't agree with that. I don't think it makes sense, and we don't have any sources for it. At least I didn't see any. I may be wrong, of course. Sometimes the kopias, which the Petyhorcy used, had pennants, others didn't. Alongside that, they could use spears, which were rohatynas, so flanked spears, I think is the term, like the ones with the little wings near the base, so the weapon doesn't get stuck in the body and you can just take it out after hitting. They had sabers, Pokojski rights that they use circation sabers specifically. Elingas also found earlier that they could have been using shields, which I also believe could have been the case. They probably had they definitely had at least one pistol because the military manual writes that they did. More commonly, they probably had 2 pistols because they were a close quarters unit. And it was very oftentimes said that they were also equipped with a carbine or a hakownica or a rusznica, so a long gun used for cavalry. So not a forkiet, but with a fork, but with a cavalry gun instead. On top of that, they were usually armed in chainmail, misiurkas, szyszaks, again, depending on the situation. If they were fighting gunpowder units, full armor. If they were fighting Tatars or other steppe peoples or Turks, they usually wore chainmail. Of course, it could happen that against the Turks they did wear armor, but whatever. Right, I'm talking. Elingas, do you want to say anything about this, or do you have any questions?
I don't know anything about. I don't really know anything about the Petyhorcy or really anything about this unit.
I mean, I know, so I'm asking like if you have any questions, because.
I mean, well, why did they use copias? Like their version of a winged hussar's lance.
This is actually leading back into a question I forgot to ask myself. Why were the Petyhorcy a thing? Why did they need to have shorter lances, worse armor, everything, just basically downgraded? Well, 2 points. 2 reasons, actually. One, Panzerni apparently weren't enough. They needed a unit in between, so one that could be perfectly universal. That could play the Dragoon, that could play the Hussar, that could play the light cavalry. So they were filling all roles. They could charge, they could retreat, they could feint, they could do everything. So they were very good in all field. And second was that Lithuania was very poor. So they could not actually put as much Hussars out, like winged Hussars, as Poland did. They were just poorer. So they settled for having slightly worse Hussars. I think that's the origin of the Petyhorcy personally. I don't see any other reason. Because it's not that the Lithuanians didn't have any heavy cavalry before the Petyhorcy. They had knights, they had chainmail cavalry, so certainly something needed to spur them on to actually form the unit. You kind of led me back into that because I was about to forget it. Do you have any other questions about them?
Not really. I have nothing to ask.
You're still probably one of my most active guests, so that's good. If you saw the previous episodes, some of them are really AFK. But that's good, that's good. It's nice to have a change. I think I'll record more episodes about Lithuania later, but anyway, back on track. So we got their equipment covered. One thing that I also want to add, the horses had to be good. So like in Hussars, you could not enter the unit if your horse was not of adequate size, of adequate breed. I do not think these horses were of Hussar quality, so the specific Hussar horses which were bred for Hussars. Maybe they were sometimes, but I do believe the requirements for horse were lower than those of winged Hussars, but they were still quite high. As Sobieski writes, you could not use the kopia on a shitty horse. So, yeah. We got equipment covered. Let's go into organization. This is going to be a quite short segment because there's not much to talk about. What happened I think there are two possibilities, because I need to preface this by saying we have no sources on how the Petyhorcy were organized. Why? Well, this stems from the fact that I've covered this on the previous episode, but it was in Polish, so probably nobody understands. This stems from the fact that every single unit of Petyhorcy is listed as pancerni in all armies. In the Crown Army, in the Polish Army, they are both listed as pancerni. Why? Because they were simply considered to all be the same. Only about the time of Kitowicz, so the times of August II, August III, the term for Petyhorcy became like a separate thing. They started calling them Petyhorcy. So I think for the organization, they either followed the Hussar organization, so a rotmistrz, a namiestnik, a porucznik, a chorąży, all that, and specific kinds of kopias, or a specific number of kopias, or the pancerni organization. Because what is the difference? These units both belong to the national authorament of Poland and Lithuania, so they were organized the same. However, between Hussars and pancerni, and thus Petyhorcy, there was one major difference. The Hussars were often formed in kopias, so platoons, so lances, whatever you want to call them, of 2 or 3. Why? To make the unit more shallow. Because this is hard to explain to a foreigner. I'm not saying you, Elingas, but generally to foreigners. Poland followed up till like 1776 the medieval organization of troops and the medieval rank order of battle. So in the cavalry unit, when you were on the battlefield, there were two types of soldiers. There were the towarzysze and the pocztowi. The pocztowi could be peasants, they could be lesser nobles, they could be just basically anybody. And the towarzysze were the actual nobles who put out the kopia. Because how a Hussar unit organized is that you had a dozen kopias brought together by one big nobleman, like very rich, and then brought into a unit and brought before the king. Hello, we are here, please hire us. Of course, he had to get a letter of recommendation before, but let's not get into that, that's a little bit complex. Maybe I'll record an episode about it later when I'm talking about Hussars in the Saxon times. However, thing is, often Hussars were ordered to come only with one pocztowy. And pancerni, meanwhile, could have a dozen pocztowy. So, for example, usually a lance has like one towarzysz, so the nobleman, the one who organizes the lance, or the kopia, and, for example, 5 pocztowy. In pancerni units, that did not quite matter. Everybody was similarly equipped, so it was anything. But in Hussars, it was often the case that the towarzysz could be very well equipped, but the pocztowy could not. He would just be worse equipped, he would have lesser combat value, but he would still get paid for being in a kopia. And hetmans, for example, I think Czarniecki, made countermeasures against this by ordering Hussar units to be formed in units of 2. So you had a towarzysz and a pocztowy, so 2 people and no more. This was for 2 reasons. Why? To make the unit shallower in combat, so it could... I don't really understand this. I think it's about more hitting power, so more towarzysze stand in the front, so more lances can hit the enemy at once. I think it's about that. As well as making the unit simply of higher quality. If you have like for every single kopia, 1 towarzysz Hussar, and for example 6 pocztowy Hussar, those pocztowy will usually be of much lower quality. Basically, a kopia, a medium quality horse, a single hat, and a cuirass, and a lot of hope. So that's not exactly a good Hussar. You don't want that in your unit. So why am I talking about this? Back to the Petyhorcy. They could either follow the Hussar unit of organization or the Petyhorcy unit of organization. So either a lot of pocztowy or little pocztowy. Personally, I think, as is usually the case, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. It could be regulated, it could be unregulated. All we see is that the equipment is regulated, but never the organization. We don't have, for example, a letter of recommendation for forming a Petyhorcy unit, sadly. I don't know why, we just don't. I don't think we have any of those. Although I've not looked because I didn't get the idea, but if I do find anything on the matter, I will bring it up because I think it would be really interesting. So we got organization covered. Elengas, do you want to add anything onto that?
All I know is that Petyhorcy just followed the Towarzysza Pocztowy organization system. That's all I know about their organization. This is still a new topic to me, so I don't know much.
You're Lithuanian. You have the information given to you at birth. What are you talking about, bro?
I didn't learn it in school.
He forgot, guys. He forgot. He's not fully Lithuanian. He is a fake Pole. Okay, back on track. Yes, you are correct. As mentioned, they definitely followed the Towarzysze and Pocztowe organization system, mainly because they were part of the national autorament. So in Poland, you had two types of armament. The foreign and the national. The national were hussars, pancerni, Petyhorcy, light cavalry. And the foreign was German infantry, reitars, dragoons, artillery, all that. So yes, they definitely followed the Towarzysze and Pocztowy system of operation or of formation. The only question is, what was the ratio of Pocztowy to Towarzysz? But we don't know, so I guess LMAO, whatever. Now we're gonna move on to battles and combat performance. We do not have many accounts of Petyhorcy fighting. However, the ones we do are very impressive. I learned something that kind of shook me today, which I'm gonna read in a moment, but it's completely new to me and I'm very happy to read it to you, because it moved the timeline of Hussars fighting from ending in 1702 to 1716, which isn't a lot, and it's not exactly Hussars, but it's still a successful charge that we have documented, which is a lot. So, Radosław Sikora writes, the most impressive feat of Petyhorcy is a battle that happened 200 kilometers north of Moscow, at Suzdal, where 200 Petyhorcy routed a Muscovite army allegedly 12,000 strong. It is worth mentioning that the number takes into account all men, fighting or not. So the Battle of Suzdal, I think it's interesting. I'm not personally very invested in the 1600s, early 1600s, but it's still worth mentioning because it's one of the few accounts that I could find where the Petyhorcy fought. It is worth mentioning that the Petyhorcy had a lot of battles because they were, again, universal troops. However, they are often lost to the sands of time. However, it is still very impressive that 200 Petyhorcy can shatter an army several thousand strong. Because, of course, you need to take into account that the Muscovite army was kind of better organized than the Polish one, and they actually had a lot less what we call czerń, so camp servants to do your food, your how do you say it? Just all the camp duties, cooking food, cleaning shit, etc., etc. I don't know how a camp works. I don't want to get into it. Sewing clothes, for example, all that. So they had a lot less. I would make it that perhaps the Petyhorcy were up against maybe half that number, at least 6,000 troops, right? Next, we go to the battle that I was most interested in talking about, which is the Battle of Kowalew in 1716. Radosław Sikora writes, they also showed their combat prowess also in the 18th century when charging Saxon lines. They broke through them several times back and forth. That happened in Kowalew on the 5th of October 1716. As wrote Camphausen, the Hussars not only quickly broke the enemy ranks, but turned around and attacked a second and third time. I recall the Battle of Kowalew against Saxons. the Poles were losing and lost, if not for the Lithuanian Petyhorcy banners under Colonels Radgowski and Nowosielecki, who many times and back charged the Saxons and broke through, but where Radgowski died. I think this is a very impressive feat where you can take, so these are two banners of Petyhorcy. So a banner is usually 100 horses strong, like 200 Petyhorcy, and in the 18th century, take that unit, which is apparently the downfall of Hussars, which it was, but still, I love these flashes of glory in a dying age. You can take these 200 Hussars, set them up against a wall of muskets about, what was it, 3,000 strong, 6,000 strong, charge them, break through, and do that stuff again and again and again, and keep winning. Of course, they did pay in blood where their commander died, Radgowski. However, it is still nonetheless extremely impressive. Kazimieras, would you like to say anything about that?
This also like really surprised me because I did not expect that cavalry in the 1700s would win against like against infantry. I did not expect this. Like at all. Like I was drinking water and I almost like spit it out when I heard it.
It actually happens in this period more than you may think, mainly because it's Polish cavalry or Swedish cavalry, and in turn Swedish cavalry learned from the Poles when they were fighting against them. This is part of a phenomenon or a tactical, let's say, strategic use of cavalry, which is different in the East and in the West. In the West, they believed at the time in Western Europe that it was better to use the cavalry as like a platform for shooting from a horse with a gun. However, in Poland, that never quite catched on. We did have dragoons and reiters and whatnot, but the rifle, except for the dragoons, was always the secondary weapon. Although no, dragoons were still mainly either mobile infantry or cavalry armed with spears, because a dragoon always had a rifle or a carbine. Sorry, yes, a carbine, never a rifle. But they also had a saber, a spear, and a pistol, so they were very universal. However, we do have a lot of examples of cavalry charging a musket line and breaking through, be that Hussars, be that Petyhorcy, be that Pancerni, Dragoons, or even Pospolite Ruszenie, which is just a cavalry levy. That happened at Krzyżbrok, where the winged Hussars charged an enemy unit and broke it, then returned. That happened at Kalisz, where the cavalry flanked the enemy and broke it, and returned. Then that happened at Kliszów, where the cavalry, allegedly, because there's many accounts of this, charged the Swedish cavalry, broke them, and returned. If I have to think of an example where... Oh, Olkieniki, right, Olkieniki. In that battle, there was a moment where Polish cavalry with nothing but sabers and pistols charged a unit of infantry, broke them, and just routed them completely, then started slaughtering them. I think it's very interesting. So, I don't want to get into like, oh, we're so superior. However, I do think that the Polish art of using cavalry is much superior to the art of the Westerners in the use of cavalry. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think in Western Europe, they probably like lacked a unit like the winged hussars, for example, that could challenge infantry, that could like break like through infantry. But because Europe was going through like the whole second shot era, where cavalry in the West, well, in Western Europe only, not only, but cavalry was being like heavy cavalry was being phased out for lighter cavalry like dragoons, etc. But in the East, it was like completely different. Like cavalry was still like dominant. It was still the main force, like in battle. But I don't have anything else to add because I don't know anything about this, but it surprised me a lot.
You are like me a few years back when I was like, oh, it's the 18th century, cavalry cannot be useful if they're charging. And then I read about the Swedes, and then I read about the Poles and the Polish noblemen. I'm like, oh shit. All right, bro. All right. I do think it's always a case of just morale when you're using horses for a charge. If your cavalry is weak in spirit, they will retreat once they get fired upon. If not, then, well, they make miracles, I dare say. It is worth mentioning that at this period, most European armies, including the Swedish army, were dropping pikes. And for example, at Krzyżbrock, there were no pikes. At Kwiszów, there were pikes, but I don't think they ever came into contact with the hussars. But for example, at Kowalew, there were no pikes. So you need to understand one thing, my dear listeners and Kazimieras. If you are charging as a hussar a pike, you will not win. They cannot break them. Or can, but always with great sacrifice. For example, at Kruszyn, when they did break the Muscovite style, the Western infantry, that only happened because, most likely, the ranks were circling. You cannot charge a pike with a kopia and win. That is my opinion, and I think it's reasonable. Because the slight difference in length does not make up for the fact that even if you run the enemy through with your kopia, that pike is still there and it's still gonna impale you or your horse when you get close. Right. I think that's everything for today. Kazimieras, would you like to say anything?
I mean, what can I say? Like, I have nothing else like to add onto like of what you just said. But it is a really like interesting topic that I will definitely study in my own free time.
I am glad I have infected you with my historical passions, yes. And I hope I infected a lot of our dear listeners today. I thank you for your attention. My guest has been Sir Kazimieras of Lithuania. Everyone, please clap. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.